Hey guys, Mr. Backenberg here. In this video, we're going to look at writing ratios and proportions. So when we're looking at a ratio uses division to compare two different quantities. And there's three different ways that we can show a ratio. Okay, this first one, we're comparing this number A to this number B. So we would read this A to B just like it's written. But instead of putting the word to between them, we could put a colon between them. But we would read it the same way. We're comparing A to B. The last way that we can display a ratio is as a fraction. So we could have A over B, or we could say it comparing A to B, just like we've been doing. But regardless of which way we write out our ratios, we always have to reduce them down as much as possible. So we're going to look at writing out a ratio. So we know that a volleyball team plays 14 home matches and 10 away matches. We're going to write out the ratio of home matches compared to away matches. So remember, there's three different ways that we can write out a ratio. And I'm just going to write out the first way for now. We'll reduce and then we can look at writing out those other ways. So we know that there are 14 home matches and we're comparing that to 10 away matches. So one way to write it is 14 to 10, but we said we always want to reduce down our ratios as much as possible. So I'm looking at this 14 and this 10, thinking if there's a number that we can divide nicely out of both of those. And 14 and 10 are both divisible by 2. So if I took 14 and divided it by 2, I'd get 7. And if I took 10 and divided it by 2, we'd get 5. So we'd say the ratio of home matches to away matches is 7 to 5. Now we could also write that with a colon in between there, so we could go 7 and then a colon 5, but it'd be the same thing. The ratio of home matches to away matches is 7 to 5. Or lastly, if we wanted to, we could write this out as a fraction. So we would go 7 over 5, but again, we would read it the exact same way, and we would say the ratio of home matches to away matches is 7 to 5. Now we've got a similar setup here. Again, we've got our volleyball team playing 14 home matches and 10 away matches, but we're going to write out a different ratio this time. Now we're going to write out the ratio of home matches to total matches. So we still know that they are playing 14 home matches, but now the number we're comparing it to, we need to figure out what the total number of matches is. So we've got 14 home and 10 away, and if we add those together, there are 24 total matches. But again, we always want to reduce down our fractions as much as possible. So 14 and 24, those are each divisible by 2. So 14 divided by 4 is 7, and 24 divided by 2 is 12. So the ratio of home matches to total matches is 7 to 12. Now we could also write that with a colon in between there, so we could say 7 to 12 this way, or we could also write that as a fraction, 7 on top, 12 on bottom. Regardless of which way we write it, it's the same exact ratio. So the ratio of home matches to total matches is 7 to 12. Now the next thing we're going to look at is a proportion, and a proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equivalent to each other. And typically when we're talking about a proportion, we're going to write those ratios out as fractions. So this proportion is saying the fraction A over B is equal to the fraction C over D. Now, as we're looking at setting up proportions, a lot of times we're going to have an unknown value in our proportion. So in this case, we've got an X in here. And when you've got an unknown value in there, we typically try to solve to figure out what that value is. So we've got the equation 11 over 6 equals X over 30. And we're going to try to figure out what this X value is. Now, as we look at our variable on the right-hand side, X over 30, remember that fraction bar means we're dividing. So we're taking X and we're dividing it by 30. In order to get rid of division by 30, what we're going to have to do is multiply both sides by 30. So on the right-hand side, the times 30 and the divided by 30 cancel each other out, leaving us with just a plain X. On the left-hand side, we're multiplying some fractions together. That 30 doesn't really look like a fraction right now, but I can take it and put it over 1. Now, when we multiply fractions together, we multiply the tops together. So 30 times 11 is 330, and then 1 times 6 is 6. Now, I've got this fraction 330 over 6 is equal to x, but I can reduce down that fraction on the left-hand side. I can do the division that's written there. 330 divided by 6 should give me 55. So that unknown x value on the top of that fraction is 55. Now we're going to look at setting up a proportion. So we've got a recipe for some tomato salsa that calls for 30 tomatoes, and that's going to make 12 pints of salsa. We want to figure out how many tomatoes would be needed to make 4 pints of salsa. So there's actually 2 different ways that we can set up this proportion, but what I want you to notice is that they have similar information in the same position. So the first way to write out this proportion is we can take the information as it's given to us. 30 tomatoes makes 12 pints of salsa, but an unknown amount of tomatoes makes 4 pints of salsa. Now notice that both of these have the amount of tomatoes on top and the number of pints on bottom. So they have similar information in the same position. The other way to write out the proportion would be making fractions out of similar information. So we've got 30 tomatoes being compared to an unknown amount of tomatoes. Now, since we took the 30, which is from the larger recipe, then when we're looking at the pints, the 12 pints has to go on top because that's from the larger recipe as well. So we would be comparing the 12 pints to the 4 pints. So again, we're setting up the proportion with similar information. Now to solve this one, I'm just going to look at this proportion on the left-hand side, and for just a second, I'm going to remove those labels out of there. So I'm going to go 30 over 12 equals x over 4. And just like we were seeing in our last example, when we check out the variable, we should notice that our x value is being divided by this number. So we have x divided by 4. And in order to get rid of division by 4, we are going to multiply both sides by 4. So on the right-hand side, the times 4 and the divided by 4 cancel each other out. On the left-hand side, when we're multiplying these fractions together, I'm going to take that 4 and put it over 1. So 4 times 30 is 120, and then 1 times 12 is 12, and that equals our x value. Now on the left-hand side, that fraction is reducible. We can actually divide that out. 120 divided by 12 is 10, so our missing x value is 10. But because this was a word problem, there's some context to that answer, and that x value represented a number of tomatoes. So in order to make 4 pints of salsa, we would need 10 tomatoes. Now I'm not going to go through and do all of the actual solving, but if we were to solve this other proportion instead of the first one that we solved, we would get the exact same answer. In this last example, we've got an elevator that takes passengers from the lobby of the John Hancock Center in Chicago up to the observation level, and that travels 150 feet in 5 seconds. The observation level is located on the 94th floor, which is 1,029 feet above the ground. We want to figure out how long it's going to take the elevator to travel from the lobby on ground level up to the observation level. So we're going to work on setting up a proportion. Now, looking at the first bit of information that we've got, we can go 150 feet in 5 seconds. So it takes us 5 seconds to go 150 feet. Now, if we look at the other set of information that we've got, now I put the time on top, the 5 seconds. For the other set of information, we don't know the time, so we've got an unknown amount of seconds. So I'm going to go x seconds over the feet that we're going to travel is that 1,029 feet. So here's my ratio that I'm going to look at, but to solve it, I'm going to get rid of the labels. So I'm going to do 5 over 150 equals x over 1,029. Now, in order to get x all by itself, right now we are dividing by 1,029. So in order to get rid of that division, we're going to have to multiply both sides by 1,029. On the right-hand side, the times 1,029 and the divided by 1,029 cancel each other out. On the left-hand side, I'm going to take that 1,029 and put it over 1. When we take 1,029 times 5, we get 5,145. And when we take 1 times 150, we get 150. And that's going to equal our x value. Now this fraction doesn't reduce down nicely, but if we do the division, we'll get a nice decimal in there. And what it ends up being is 34.3 as that unknown x value. But again, because we have a word problem, we should give this answer some context. So it takes 34.3 seconds for the elevator to travel 1,029 feet from the lobby to the observation level. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.